please join me. I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, good evening. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I want to thank the staff for being here and supporting us tonight. I want to thank the members of the committee. I want to thank the members of the public who are in attendance with us this evening. And I also want to thank everybody that's joining us over the internet as well and watching us from the comfort of their own home. They probably made the better choice tonight by not coming out, but here we are. And so I want to thank everybody for doing the hard work of trying to figure these difficult issues out for the county. Tonight's agenda is pretty simple. We're going to have a presentation and discussion on the financing mechanisms and methods for possible construction of a courthouse. We've been talking about this for quite some time now, and I think the natural evolution of things and certainly what the county commission has asked of this committee and of itself is, how do we pay for it? And how much money do we have to pay for it? And there's certainly a number of mechanisms to pay for a county courthouse. And we have Tom Grimman here tonight from Collier Securities available. I want to thank Tom. Tom gave a presentation this morning in front of the county commissioners. We're, of course, having this meeting tonight so that we can accommodate anybody who wasn't members of the committee who weren't able to attend the commission meeting this morning. And this also tends to be a format that's a little more freewheeling, and we have the ability and time, most importantly, to have a discussion on these issues. So I'm going to call Tom Grimman up to the hot seat, or the hot stand, if you will, and ask Tom to, if you could provide essentially the same presentation you gave us this morning.
Yes, I will do that. So, one of the flaws, I think, from the presentation earlier today was I didn't have any handouts, so nobody had a chance to really study anything. So I went and I printed some handouts, so you can actually have something to look at and mark on, which I find helpful. But everything's digital nowadays, so I just figured I'd use your Elmo here, your high-tech Elmo, and I used it, and I think it worked pretty well. But there were still some questions, I think, that would have been answered if someone could have marked on their paper and did some of that. So I will. You want to take one and just pass it down? So I started with the second graph you're getting that's coming down, but I'll start with this one. After my first one didn't go over so well this morning, I didn't even want to break out my second one. So, I mean, I think I got through it, and I think everyone kind of understood it. But again, I think this way, if you want to mark on it, you've got graphs to mark on. But it's always, I think it's good to start off this way when someone asks about financing, everyone asks, well, what are rates doing? So I'd like to provide a kind of a historic perspective of about rates. So this is just kind of my simple graph that I usually bring along and just throw out there. It's called the 20 Bond Geo Index. This is put out by the Bond Buyer, which is kind of our Wall Street Journal paper, our industry newspaper for municipal bonds. And the 20 Bond Geo Index has been tracked for over 100 years. I've got numbers way back to the 1900s, actually 1890s. And it was only done once every month or once every quarter back then. Now it's tracked weekly. And so I have information back to, you can see back to 65. You can see it's been, the last few years, it's been bouncing around down around the 2% area. So I broke out, if you flip it over, since it gets pretty busy down there, I broke it out on the back page, so it only goes back to like 2007, right before we entered the Great Recession, and to present. And you can kind of see where we're at. You can see where the 60-year low was. And you can see kind of where interest rates are at. They're trending up right now. We haven't got a new 20 bonds yet. That hasn't come out this week, but the interest rates are up this week. Treasuries are up substantially. They're up over 15 basis points. A basis point is 1/10 of 1%. So when I say 15 basis points, that's 0.15%. Or 10 basis points, that's 0.1%. 100 basis points would be 1%. So you're up over 15 basis points for this week. Munis haven't been that bad, but they're off about 5 basis points this week. But that's not annotated on here. So that little red line would start up a little bit for this next week. So you can kind of see where, what is this? I got to ask, what does this show me? It just gives you a perspective where interest rates are at. And then the next graph here is you can see where historic interest rates are at. If you look at that second page, we're trading below where I would say where average interest rates are at for 20-year A-rated GO bonds. Usually we're above the 3% line, right at that 3% line. You can see where we've bounced around a little bit. So historically, we're at a very low rate for interest rates. So this one here is the one that got me in a little trouble today. And we'll tell you, I did not use a crayon to do this. This is done on a computer, and these are plotted points. And again, I'll start off with, there's a lot of information on here. If you want to mark anything down on yours, please do. The biggest point I had here this morning and what I'm trying to convey tonight is I've graphed the 10-year Treasury on here. That's the blue line. The Fed funds rate, which is the rate that the Fed controls, and then basically the Bond Buyer Weekly GO20 Index, which is the first graph I showed you. That's the green line. And really the point of this is knowing now that the Fed started off 2021 with no increases in 2022. They said first increases would come, Fed funds increase rate would be in 2023, they thought. And then by September, it was going to be 1 increase. And then by the end of the year, they're talking 3 increases. And mainly the reason behind that is because of inflation that's going on right now. The idea is raise interest rates. That will stem the flow of money into society and hopefully hold inflation in place. And you can do that really well when you have a robust economy and things are improving. But as some of us are old enough, and I was just a child then, probably just really young, and we remember back in the 80s where there was something called stagflation, where interest rates went really high, and we didn't have a growing economy, we had a stagnant economy. So we had inflation and a stagnant economy. That was called stagflation. I thought that term was developed in the late 70s, early 80s, but actually it had been coined years before that. There was another instance, and I can't remember what period in time it was, but 100 years before. But anyway, the point of this graph, not to digress too much, really, is to show when the red line is being increased, and that's the Fed controlling it, when you start to see the increase there, you start to see interest rates tend to start to increase. Obviously, as they bring it down, interest rates start to come down. So you can see in 2018, 2017, when they started to bump up interest rates significantly, interest rates on the blue and green line. So the point, I'll just cut to the chase, is that they're talking about 3 Fed fund rate increases next year. They're talking initially right now 25 basis points for each one. Nobody knows when they're really going to come. Some are speculating and not until May. Others are saying it'll be earlier, might be in their March meeting. But it really kind of depends on if the Fed sees inflation as being something more, important to work on. They probably got the okay to move the Fed chair's probably got the okay to move at any time, really, if he feels the need to, at least the first quarter point. But anyway, so as they start to inch those interest rates up for the Fed funds, the result historically has been, at least according to the graph, is that the interest rates you would pay on your bonds are going to increase also. So that was the intent of the graph, is to kind of show this isn't just me and my summation of what's going to happen. I think historically you can see that as the Fed fund rate starts to go up, interest rates start to go up. So, and that obviously will impact what you pay on your bond issue. Now, I don't know what the magic number, if they increase interest rates 75 basis points all next year, that doesn't necessarily mean your interest rates are going to go up 75 basis points. I mean, there's no correlation that I know of or heard of that tells you, if Fed funds rates go up 50 basis points, what's the impact on interest rates on 20 years? I don't have a number like that, and I've never heard of one.
Tom,
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
historically speaking, just riffing off what you said there, is there a correlation, though, between some type of, if the Fed would act, does that mean we're gonna pay more for our bonds? Does that mean it will be more expensive to borrow money?
To borrow money, yes. I mean, I think that's the intent by raising the Fed funds rate, is to make money more expensive, whether it's for Lincoln County, South Dakota, or whoever. It's to make money more expensive so that inflation is stemmed.
Will the cost of that money exceed what the Fed does in terms of a raise, or will it be lower than that? How does that work?
I think that's what I was alluding to. I don't think there's a mathematical formula out there for me to present to you that tells you what that relationship will be. Sometimes, actually, Fed increases have actually been good for the market. You can see where some have increased substantially. You go back to like 05, 06, and they saw that as preemptive enough to keep inflation from happening that you really didn't see a huge bump up in interest rates. If you look at the red line, I mean, there was tremendous movement in the Fed funds rate, but interest rates didn't move that much. And the reason why, or you look back, they say the reason why is because they thought the Fed was way ahead of inflation. So by them doing what they did, there wasn't a huge increase in interest rates.
And we're at a.
Commissioner,
we're at a-
correct
go
request
ahead.
for use the mic, Joel.
Oh, and
please.
we're at a historic low right now, correct?
I think those are the key points. We're in an inflationary state that we haven't seen in 40 years, I think is what they say on TV, 39 years. And we're at historically low interest rates. And I was trying to point out in that first graph, really where we normally trade in the last 10 years is between that, 3% range to 4% range, and we're below the 3% range.
Now, there's been some in the current administration who have stated that, maybe the inflation that we're seeing around the country is transitory. Can you speak to that?
Right, and I think you pointed out earlier today, and that's a good point, is that I think even the Fed chair has come out and said that they don't think that this is transitory inflation right now. We're experiencing real inflation. Not that transitory inflation isn't real, but it's just that it's not going to go back to where it was. And one of the things that I brought out earlier too, and I think the architect reiterated in his presentation, is that they were talking transitory. So like if you were paying $4 for a 2x4, and when it was only supposed to be $2 a 2x4, if we didn't have the transitory inflation, it'd go back to $2 for that 2x4 in 6 months or a year. But what I've found over the years is that when you do have inflationary costs, and we haven't had this in 40 years, but just regular inflationary costs, once you reach a certain level, it never really goes back. So that 2x4 that's $4 right now is going to stay $4. Maybe it'll back off a little bit, but it's not going to go back. What it tends to do in construction costs, and again, I'm not the guy necessarily to talk about it, I've just been told this by a lot of architects and construction folks I work with over 30 years, is that it might stay level. It might back off a little bit, but once it reaches a certain point, it doesn't like dip way back down again. So even in 2008, 2009, when we had the Great Recession, you had some deflation, but not what you would have expected in a
But
recession.
Tom, somewhat is affected by the supply and demand curve, everybody's had. But, the supply we've had is very limited because of the situation of COVID causing disruption and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And we've also been drunk with money coming in. I mean, my God, we've got the state of South Dakota has $1 billion. We get $11 million. People have had immense amounts of rent subsidies and all that other kind of stuff. So you have all the money supply has been increased exponentially. So that's one-time money. So when that's gone, there's no more. So my question is, if that money we don't have, will that affect the inflation situation.
It could, and you might, and again, we're going off of history.
Yep.
And this is not a typical historic period with what's going on right now with COVID and everything else. You could see where prices might back off. I'm just telling you what historically has happened. But you're right, supply has been, and you know, it goes back to my econ class, and every time some boiled back down to supply and demand.
Man, yeah.
Yep, and so with supply being limited right now and demand being so high, that has driven, and that's one reason why they were saying that, oh, well, this is just transitory because everything's backed up on the ships and everything's this and that. And then I think they figured out that wasn't necessarily the case, and that's why they've backed off of that statement of transitory inflation. If it was, and it was just based on supply and demand, then, you know, that would be transitory. I mean, you would see maybe a high peak at one point, but now they've backed off of that, because I don't think they want to, you know, eat their words.
So Tom, what we're facing is this. If inflation keeps going up and the feds then have to act to try to stem inflation so you don't go back to the 80s when, you know, if you bought a house, you were paying 15 or 18% interest rates. So they got to try to cut that off. So when they raise the interest rates, the cost of borrowing money increases as well. And that will affect our ability to sell bonds and the amount of bonds that we, you know, what's the cost going to be of whatever we come up with?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's.
So it's a time, that's a time issue too, isn't it?
Well, again, as Woody always taught me, my predecessor, you know, don't let the financing wag the project also, right? I mean, and that's always been something that it's always, you know, kind of been an axiom that has always panned out. But again, you've got a project, I think, here, something that's been talked about for a long time. And so I don't necessarily think that's the case here, but I just throw that out there. So then if that's the case, then you look at, well, what's the financing? What do we gain by waiting? You know, I don't think you gain a lot by waiting, because I think the risk of interest rates going up is greater than the risk of the benefit of interest rates going down, given where inflation is, the intent of the Fed, and again, back to where current interest rates are, where I think they're artificially low, they're being kept artificially low, but they haven't bounced up like some people thought they would have by now. So the Fed's gotten out of the money printing business, so they're, that's a little facetious, I guess. I should say the bond purchasing, which is where they buy their own bonds, which they do by printing money. But anyway, they've gotten out of that business to try and maintain low interest rates, and rates still haven't, you know, taken off substantially. So I'm just giving you my best guess, and I'm giving you some historical perspective, and, you know, that's why they pay you guys the big money, to make these recommendations to the commission, so. And I can give you my recommendation. I mean, I think interest rates are going up. I mean, I've been loving the fact of where they're at. Obviously, we've done a lot of refinancings, but I mean, historically, where I've been for the last 30 years doing this, 29 and a half years, is that, you know, we're below. You look at that 2% line on there, on that first graph I gave you, and it's bouncing on that where we should be up more around the 3% line probably.
Tom, the cost of borrowing money for a house, you know, we went through the 1, we went through 2, we're at 3. Best projections are going to be that we're going to bump 5% to 6% before long to borrow, I mean, on financing a house. And you know what that means as far as cost of housing today. So if you're a first-time home buyer and your average price of your house is now $225,000, which is about the average right there,
Yep.
and you got to finance, that could put a lot of people out of reach of buying a home. So.
So let's see, any more questions kind of about the state of the interest rate market, the muni market? Any questions about the graph? You got a lot more questions earlier, but at least you got something to look at there. I think I probably shortchanged some of the commissioners earlier today, maybe. So this is some numbers that I presented earlier today. I've revised the numbers slightly, just so I wasn't just kind of shooting from the hip. And actually, I'm pretty proud of myself. I was pretty much on when I was told Commissioner Gibbons that it was like 3 cents, 0.3 cents in addition. It's not even that much. I think it was 0.2 or less. And that being that I started off with a 6% growth factor for the first 3 years, and I reduced that to 4%. So I redid the numbers. I used the exact valuation, equalized value for the county, which is over underneath the total EAV. It's $7.5 billion right now in 2022. So that was grown at 4% for the next 6 years, 5 years after that, I think. And then after that, it was grown at 2%, which is really just inflation. And then I wrapped it in. We started with the number of 37 million, which was given to me. Seemed to be a consensus number. So then I looked at that over 30 years, wrapped it in. I think earlier today I had 17.9 or 17.7 cents would be the additional increase over what you're already paying, or that would be, I'm sorry, back off. You're paying right now 8.2 cents, and I did the math on that, so that's 8.2 cents per thousand on your current courthouse, all right? The 17.9 would be the total that would be paid. So once the bond, this is wrapped around the existing, so once the bond issue, where we're standing, the annex comes off, you're still gonna be at 17.9. Now, to make it easy, earlier today, Commissioner Aaron's, he's got a job in finance probably, he pointed out, well, why don't we round to 10 cents? And I was like, yeah, why not? That makes sense. It's on the conservative side, adds a couple cents to it, but it's really easy to figure this out than if we do 10 cents. So if your increase is 10 cents on a $250,000 house, you're gonna pay $25 extra a year. If you've got $1 million piece of property out there, where that be ag, there's no benefit, I didn't mention this earlier, no benefit to ag land or commercial land or anything like that. The levy is straight across the board. So if you have $1 million in ag property, that's gonna be $100. $500,000, $50. $100,000 house, is gonna be $10.
Yeah, Tom, and
Yes.
first of all, thanks for the email you sent me this afternoon, re-explaining all that. You sent this out. Just to take a step back for a moment, just so the public understands, or those who weren't there this morning, what was originally presented this morning was a scenario that envisioned 6% growth. And I think in the document that you've put here in front of us is a scenario where we envision 4% growth for the first 6 years and then 2% thereafter. And I think one of the commissioners brought up this issue of will the increased assessed value of property as we go forward in the out years, will that have the capacity to bring the 17.9 or 17.9 cent bond down? Our historical rate of growth here in Lincoln County is 4%. So there is I guess I'm kind of asking you, there is the potential that the 17.9 cents could go down if our growth target is exceeded at 2% with the historical 4%, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So you would, even if you stayed with your 4% growth over the next, say, 30 years, I mean, obviously in year 7, you're actually going to see a reduction in your taxes, at least the amount of money that's going to pay for the addition, the courthouse renovation, the new courthouse part. So my thought, and you can talk to an economic development guy, and Larry deals with those folks. I mean, as Sioux Falls moves south further though, and more rooftops start to enter, south of 57th Street. Right now, it's been a lot of commercial business, which is great. Those are great taxpayers. I think that's going to continue, and then you're going to see the rooftops start to move in, and that's where you're going to see even more growth. And I've seen plans for, a project down here in Canton. So I mean, not that this project opens any of that up It's just that it's gonna happen. I think you're gonna see some bigger growth numbers than the 4% personally. But that was a number that Sherry was comfortable with, and whatever she's comfortable with, I'm comfortable with. And so that's the number we're using. And if she wants to go lower, I can go lower. I mean, it just pushes some of the principal down further, and, you know, it costs a little bit more in the long run, but then it doesn't impact taxpayers as much now. So that's, you know, that's important. And
Tom, this morning you had an exhibit that showed us how we started. I think it was in 2006 when our evaluation was at $2.5 billion.
right.
Do you have that exhibit with you?
Yeah, it's Exhibit A.
And would you mind explaining what that shows, please?
Yep. So we'll look at this. So back in 2006, we financed the annex that we're in right now, the courthouse annex, for $8,900,000. And at that time, this is basically the same report from back then. You can see that the total EAV was $2.638 billion at that time. So you can see we've gone from 2.6 up to 7.5. At that time, the rate was basically 25 cents per thousand.
And today it's 8 cents.
It's
Correct.
8, yeah, and I did the math, it's 8.2 cents since we're dealing with, 8.2 cents since we're dealing with pennies already. So again, to do the math, if we subtracted the 17.9 from 8.2, that's 9.7. Am I doing the math right in my head? I didn't write it down anywhere. So I'm just rounding to 10. At 9.7, round to 10. We can talk about that at the coffee shop tomorrow.
So the point of the exhibit is that because of growth in the county, going from $2.5 billion to $7.5 billion, we were able to reduce the rate from 25 cents a thousand down to about 7 cents a thousand where we are today.
Right.
And would it be fair to assume that it's probable that if growth continues in our county, we're going to see a comparable result, that the amount of, that each taxpayer pays per thousand will go down as the county grows?
Yes, but that goes back to Commissioner Aaron's point, is that because this was a flat, we did not figure any growth into this at all. So any real growth, not just inflationary growth, but any real growth, you saw a reduction in taxes. We have to be above the 4% in the first 6 years and then above the 2% to see any real reduction in your tax rate. In the scenario I showed just a minute ago.
If, in the scenario that you showed us just before this, we were using, it looks like a 17.9 cents per thousand rate. What kind of money do we generate if we went back to the 25 cents a thousand like we did in 2016? Or six, excuse me.
So I ran two scenarios for this. There's the 25-year, but since we're just talking 30-year, let's look at 30-year. So you can see that fourth line down from the dollar amount. It was an Exhibit F. In a document I provided to folks, you can see 30 years, we wrap it around the courthouse at 25 cents. I backed into a number. It basically would give you $53.1 million. Now, I did not rerun this for you can see the total EAV was a number that I backed into, and then I did 6% after that. So this has the 6% number in here. So your total is going to be less than 53 if we use the same scenario. It's probably going to be closer to 50, 51 and a half.
Okay.
but it's going to be around that 50 million number if we want to just round and just keep everything simple.
And that would mean how much for a homeowner that had a $250,000 house on a yearly basis?
Yeah, that's, I don't have my phone. Who's got a calculator? It's going to be 25 times 25. What is that? 225, so. Oops.
125.
Well, you said 250,000, right? Yeah, so it's going to be, instead of $50, or, I'm sorry, $25, because it's a little more than that, it's going to be $62.50. Does that make sense? I think I'm doing the math right.
Thank you, Tom.
Yep, $62.50. Yes, if you needed that amount of money at 25 cents, if we just left it there. And I guess I should reiterate, I think I mentioned the Harrisburg School District and how they bond for their projects, and then they tell the public that their taxes are not going to go up. One way they do that is they've set a levy limit of $12 per thousand within their general obligation kind of levy, and they try and keep it there. And as the growth goes on, they can build new schools by keeping the levy at that rate with the growth that they've had up there in the Harrisburg School District. They tend to do the 6% to start with for a couple of years because you can kind of project out what's going on growth-wise and within the school district, and then they level it off at 4%, and then they go down to 2%. And that's how they've done it in the past. So that was kind of the model behind that. It was brought forward that it was something that they thought might work on this, and the taxpayers thought that was a good idea on the northern side of the district, or of the county. So that's how we applied this, and that's how we got to the growth. How we got to this growth idea, the $37 million and the 17.9 or cents per thousand.
And Tom, just so the members of the committee know, as well as the public, the $37 million number that we're using here in one of the graphs that you've shown us, that really comes from, there was one of the salespeople today here for one of the developers who told us that building a courthouse would cost $26 million, and then there was about another $10 million. $26 million for hard cost and another $10 million or 11 for soft cost. So just so the public and the members of the committee know where this why we are using the $37 million number, it's because one of the salespeople here threw that number out as being what the cost of the courthouse would cost if we went through them using their program. So just so the members of the committee and the public understand why we're using $37 million.
If I may, I had a quick question going back to 2006 when we started the levy for the courthouse renovation here. How much was that for?
The project.
The levy was 28 cents, but how much was the project cost at that time with a 28 cent?
They had 8.9 for the bond.
8.9? Thank you.
So Tom, using your scenario, if Lincoln County were to have a growth spurt like a major development, I talked to Ernie about this, 85th Street, for example, when that interchange gets put in, which has estimates of about $2.7, $2.8 billion of commercial growth, light industrial. That would have a huge impact on the taxes, would it not?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, just tremendous. I mean, you're looking at, well, we're at 7.5 right now. So if you added 2 billion to that, that'd be 9, so your difference, and then whatever the difference is there was at 18, 20%. So,
My brother found a piece of paper from the Lennox Independent back in, I don't know what year, 1990, whatever, in the 90s, where the headlines of the Argus Leader said that the growth in Lincoln County has resulted in lower
26%.
taxes. And I don't know why he sent that to me, but he did. So it substantiates and validates what we've been talking about.
right, yeah, and I think over time, I mean, I just did the math, it's 26% increase if a development like that came in, you know, and you've got, you know, again, the development is 2 billion, you know, what do you get on assessed, and let's hope you don't TIF it all away, and, so, I mean, there is some of that, right? So there
Let's
would
not
be
bring
that, and then,
Let's not bring that word up, okay?
yeah, I know, that's why I whispered a little bit.
Okay.
But again, then there's also the ancillary stuff around it, just
Yes.
like the Empire Mall was the Empire Mall, and then you had Empire East, you know, and that, you know, so you've got all this other stuff that could happen, most likely will happen. You look at Dolly Farms is even a better example, really. They built Dolly Farms, and then look what happened all around it. So again, it's, you know, it's gonna happen, and, I mean, it just, and again, some people may say, well, that's never gonna happen, and I'd say, well, I mean, 85th Street's gonna come. The interchange is coming.
Yes.
Unless something dramatically happens at the federal level or something happens, it's gonna happen.
Tom's just about there. They've just got one last hurdle. So this committee, when we get done going over all of the different scenarios, I said this morning, I think it will be incumbent upon the private sector. These taxpayers are gonna have to decide what it is that they want. Do they want to have a courtroom space or just a courthouse with courtrooms? Or do they want to have a facility that accommodates the sheriff's department, state's attorneys, and that's another situation. Do they want to have the whole enchilada and have a jail built in addition to that, so you have a complete public safety project? So, I mean, that's going to be the job of all these good volunteers here, that they're going to ultimately decide that. Because that's going to make the recommendation, because I think, I look at them as being the best purveyors of the information to the public. I mean, I think commissioners can be there, commissioners can certainly, you know, offer if they're asked an opinion. But I like the idea that the public's going to have to take control of this and be the lead. That's where I'm at.
And I brought up something earlier, and I thought about it after I left and drove back home to Sioux Falls, that I didn't get any pushback on, and that is when I mentioned that if this is a project that everyone thinks is gonna happen sooner or later, you know, why not now, when we're expecting costs to go up? I'm asking that to the general public, whoever's listening, why not, you know, why not now instead of watching it go up? And nobody said boo when I said that. I thought I'd get pushback from a couple commissioners or somebody. And someone can push back here. Maybe it's not foregone conclusion, but I think in the long run, I think 50% plus one believe that, you know, this is something that's gonna happen sooner or later. And if you think that, then with 10% inflation or 12%, as your architect said, 12% inflation and interest rates at 2% right now, or 2.5%, 2.25% over 30 years, and the interest rates are trending upward. Doesn't mean that they're gonna go, but I mean, the pressure is upward right now. You're gonna get the best cost right now in this particular time, whether it takes you, I think I put out earlier that if, you know, hey, this is great, I think we can do this, we don't think it's that big an impact, even if you gave your recommendation tomorrow and they acted next Tuesday, you're still looking at about 120 days if you're having an election. And I put that out earlier because you're gonna have 35 days or so just just to really hit the newspapers and make sure everything gets published. And then you've got the lead in to the and this is through a special election. And then you've got another 60 days after, if that passes, when that passes, for the bond issue to come forward, because it can't move forward until the election passes. So you're already looking at 100, I just throw that out there, 100 to 120 days that's with a special election. If you did the primary, obviously that's out in June, so, I mean, I don't know how many days that is from now, but let's just say 180. I'm sorry, Commissioner.
No.
Aaron's.
Thank you, Tom. What I was going to say is that's a good segue into the next thing we need to talk about, and that is the funding mechanisms here. So we've got general obligation bonds, and then we've got a lease purchase. Could you get into explaining all the details of those two different mechanisms to the committee and the public?
Sure, well, yeah, and it's probably the easiest part of the job. I mean, for counties, they've got two ways, really, under, Chapter 7, they can do lease purchase, and there's different types of lease purchase you can do, but you can do lease purchase. So basically, after you pay it off for $1, you own the building. It's a true capital lease. And your rating on your, and I don't think I pointed this out earlier, your rating on your general obligation bonds, your GO bonds, is the same as your limited tax GO bonds. That would be considered limited tax GO. Because you can only levy 90 cents per thousand within the lease language, which is the number under the building fund. So you're limited there. GO bonds, still with the same rating, are what they call unlimited tax. So if somehow 50% of your property got up and walked over into another county, you could raise your taxes as high as you'd have to make debt service payments on the bonds. Whereas the lease purchase, you can't. You're limited to 90 cents. Now, obviously, your land is not going to get up and go away. That's just a euphemism I use in the worst-case scenario. But anyway, that's the difference between those two. But still, the rating is still the same. You still may see, because it's not an unlimited tax, it's a limited tax on leases, you'll probably still see a 5 to 10 basis points difference on probably closer to 5. If over a lease will have higher interest rates than a GO, or general obligation bond. So you can do a lease purchase, you can do it out to 30 years, and you own it at the end. General obligation bonds, you can do actually up to 50 years. I've never sold a 50-year bond, never sold a 40-year bond. Sold a bunch of 30-year bonds in the last 2 years just because interest rates are so low, and some folks recognize that, we can borrow today at 30 years what we used to borrow for 20 years. So folks have said, hey, why not do that, especially when we've got a project that's, probably got not a useful life, but a life with no maintenance on a project. They're building buildings now where basically they're saying maintenance free for 20 to 25 years. So, and again, I'm talking like repairs, major repairs and stuff like that. Obviously, you're still gonna have regular maintenance on these things. But anyway, so they're seeing that, and that's why they're financing out further. And I've done a number of 30-year financings. So this isn't out of the ordinary to do a courthouse renovation / law enforcement center as a 30-year bond.
And then, so the folks on the committee, public understands, if you do a general obligation bond, how does that work with the commission? And then how does the lease purchase work?
Well, you're talking about, you'd have a resolution calling an election, if that's what you're alluding to. And then technically that can just pass with 3 votes, and then it can be sent to an election. I prefer all 5 to vote for it myself. That just shows that everybody's on board. The other is with the lease purchase, because you're raising taxes. We've taken the position that the law for raising taxes under 1035, I believe, states that you need more than, I think it says 60, more than 60%. Well, when you're dealing with counties, 3 of 5 is 60%. So you got to be more than 60%, you need 4 of 5. So that's how that works. Now, the general obligation bond, obviously it sets an election at that time. If you pass a resolution to do the general obligation bond, you're gonna set a dollar amount, a year, and years not to exceed, so 30 years probably. You're going to set a dollar amount, and you're going to set the date. And then the project will be listed, what the money's going to be spent on. In the lease purchase, 4 or 5 vote for it. That then, because it's similar to an opt-out, then once it's published, you got to wait 20 days, and within that 20 days, it can be referred to an election. 5% of the, I think it's 5% of the electorate from the last general election.
So Tom, you're saying regardless, the GO bond has to go to a vote?
Yes, yes. GO is a vote. And it was put out earlier that somebody said that it was 60%. That's what it is for school districts and for cities when they do GO votes. But somebody, I don't know why, figured out a long time ago, it's in the Constitution. I think it's in the Constitution. No, it's just under the county law. So 6.8B says 60% unless otherwise provided for. And then if you go to the county law, which I think is 7, it's under 7, that's where it actually says 50%. So otherwise provided for, and it says simple majority, so it's 50 plus 1.
Tom, if I may ask you, when you are talking about other places, just for frame of reference, doing those 30-year longer-term bonds, what types of projects are those? Are those projects that are going to be around for that extended period of time? Are other places doing these things right now? What are you seeing?
Most of them are schools right now, if they're doing GO bonds, or like Vermillion's looking at doing 26 million for the school district's going to do 30 years down there. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I know I had a couple others too, but mainly schools, or the projects will be around that long, I guess. We're talking main facilities. We're not doing like city halls or anything like that for 30 years. It's mainly projects that are going to be around for a long period of time.
Thank you.
I think they figure 50-year average life is on some of these projects. So that makes us feel good going out and pitching it to the public.
All right. Thank you, Tom.
You
Is
bet.
there anybody else that has anything or wants any further discussion with Tom?
You'd make a great econ teacher, Tom.
I don't know about that. I try.
Okay. So what I want to do here is open agenda item number 1 up for discussion. You know, we've heard from Tom. Some people have asked some questions. I want to ask the members of the board now. I mean, it doesn't matter to me if you have input or not. Does anybody have any discussion on agenda item number 1? You know, which is basically what we just heard from Tom.
I guess I was under the understanding, and so the GO bond was news to me, that if the commission voted 4-1 or 5-0, that it would still have to go to a public vote. But that is correct, yes?
So I'm hearing Tom say that if we're gonna borrow money and you want a low interest rate and your lowest overall cost when you do principal and interest, now's the time to bond. And because, you know, you could get stuck with a higher rate and that's gonna cost you more money. Is that right, Tom? Okay. Looking at where we started in 2006, we have the availability to raise approximately $50,000 if we went back to that level. if we get $10,000 from the feds that we can use on anything, we have the ability to do both the things that the county need. One is a courthouse and one is a jail. And my question to the committee is, why are we not doing that?
Can I jump on that? I think we should. I don't believe that, I know that it probably goes down to number 3, but I think when we got done with our very last courthouse commission or improvement committee, we decided that at that point that the sheriff's office was coming out because of the cost and that we weren't talking about a jail for a couple of years. But I think as the citizens committee got together, we've all decided that the sheriff's office needs to be in the Justice Center along with a jail. And with these prices for the bond, we need to do all at the same time. Chad, is that what we, and Larry and Paul? Yep. I think we all have an agreement on that. And I know that we were asked directly if, and I think Larry is the one that asked it, because we had all come to the conclusion that we needed this all to be done at the same time, because the future of Lincoln County is depending on what we do now, because it'll be just like this from 2006. We're out of space, and we need to do this. And I think Larry was the one that asked all of us that had opposed the jail in T if we would oppose this if we did it. And we all said no, because it needs to be in Canton is what we're looking at, and it needs to have all those pieces, because I don't think that the judges can be protected without the sheriff's department being there, and then us not spending $3 million going up to Minnehaha County to house our prisoners, I think is what our discussion ended up with. Is that correct?
Right. Betty, did the citizens group have any discussion or thoughts on the size of the jail and the cost of the sheriff's office being located out at the courthouse? And let me kind of preface my comments here, just so the public knows, the $37 million number that has been discussed is a result of a plan shown to us by a third-party group. They had their salesperson here today. And just so people know, that dollar amount only includes a courthouse that would include the courts, clerk of courts, court service officers, the state's attorneys, and the public defender's office. And I think that's what you're alluding to. I just wanted to kind of set the table so everyone knows what you're discussing.
Correct. Yeah. We also, our citizens group met 3 times since we adjourned our last meeting. We also toured Minnehaha County's jail, and then just on December 30th, we toured Brookings County. And we think that what Elevatus has presented to us can be done a whole lot differently with a different, or with our owner's rep in place, a whole lot less with the cost, depending on how they put things together with the owner's rep. Because we've met with the gentleman that we were talking to you guys this morning about, and we've brought in Judge Howman on a couple of our meetings, and Judge Rasmussen couldn't attend, but and I think that we had different people talk to each one of the commissioners for their buy-in after we decided that we weren't happy with not having the sheriff's office in the Justice Center with the courtrooms, because it's a necessary partition. And when we went to Brookings, oh my gosh, the jail administrator up there and the sheriff up there just gave us all kinds of information and names to talk to, because even they were talking about, they would love to have the contract for our prisoners up there in Brookings County, because I'll just say it, we look like fools to the state, and we've been told that by several organizations, including the sheriff's organization, that, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. But they gave us people to talk to that even talked about, and I think Larry can talk to that, about looking to house federal prisoners because they are white collar, and that we were told at that particular time that we need to look into it, but they thought that the feds would look at a contract paying us beds. But for us to be paying Minnehaha County for the beds that we're paying for and we're not filling is just, kind of raping the taxpayers here. So,
Betty, Mr. Guloff explained that in his presentation from Lincoln County Development, that the jail that they presented to us was about 220 plus people. Essentially, I think what they did is repurpose the jail proposal from 2 years ago and said, we'd like to attach it to there. Did your citizens groups, when it met, have any discussion about size of jail, budget, things like that? I mean, is it?
Let me explain the process we went through. After we had our meetings with this group, and it became painfully aware because of the presentation of the judiciary, everybody left and said, we have to do something. And we sat around for a while, and I said, well, gosh, I'd kind of like to hear what everybody thinks. And we all got together out at the depot, and we all thought the same thing. It was just kind of amazing. I was just shocked. We all thought the same thing, that we got a problem and we got to do something about it. That conversation involved into, well, okay, what are other people doing? And we said, we don't know anything about jail, so we asked the judiciary, could you show us the courthouse up in Sioux Falls? And they took us on a tour, and we wanted to see how it operated and what was wrong with it, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't make the same mistakes that they had. As part of that process, we learned that the jail was right across the parking lot, and the police officers were across the street. It was all on a centralized campus, and we assumed there was a reason for that. I'm a lawyer that's practiced in all the small county seats around here, and there's not a county that I can't go to that the sheriff isn't in the courthouse and the jail isn't part of it, or it's across the street. I mean, it's just all there. So when we sat down out at the depot, the conversation is, how come we're not having the sheriff's office out there? And we all thought, well, you ought to have the sheriff's office out there. And we continue to think that. As this conversation continued, and we looked at ways that we could raise money, and we were very mindful that we did not want to exceed what we did in '86. And attending your meetings, it became apparent that we were paying some $200,000 a month to house our prisoners. And when we went up to Brookings, we're talking to them, and the question was, can you tell us why we shouldn't be building a jail? And he said, no, we can't. You guys got to stop the bleeding. All right? You got to build your own jail. To us, the only issue is what is the size of the jail. Now, up in Brookings County, and I want you guys to correct me if I'm wrong, they paid an extra $1 million to put marble on the outside of the jail so they could satisfy the historic preservationists, and that went up to the Supreme Court. So my math says 14 million becomes 13 million, but I'm just going to use 14 million for 84 prisoners. And the pod system was set up, you could do 84 prisoners. I looked at what Darcy Johnson's group presented, and if it was a recycle of what happened prior to your last election, it's kind of close. You're looking at $14 million for 84 prisoners, and you've got to decide what it is that the size it is that you need. Up in Brookings, they told us, build this thing and build it big so you can grow. If you look at the projections that came from Darcy Johnson's group, they're suggesting that you do that in most of the scenarios when they're talking about financing. I don't want to build the courthouse short, and I don't think the citizens think that, and I don't think we want to build the jail short, Mr. Chairman. So I think the number's somewhere, between building it for 84 times 2 and that 225, but I don't have a handle on what our needs are. So for you and the county commission, can someone tell us how many prisoners we have annually up in Sioux Falls? Or the judiciary, pardon me.
I can jump in and speak to that. Bill, did you have a number?
I think the last time I looked, I think it was 63 currently in-house right now.
Right now, right?
I think I've seen it has been high.
For those of you who can't hear on the microphone, it's between that 63 right now, but it's been as high as 80. I do the felony cases here in Lincoln County. Obviously, the vast majority of the people we have in custody are felons. We do our best to be mindful to protect the public and keep people in custody when they need to be in custody, and be mindful of when people have sat in custody a significant period of time. Having said that, I do regularly monitor the inmate list here for Lincoln County, and the 70 to 75 that are on the list, at any given time, I would say over 60 are housed in Minnehaha County. Some that are on the list for us are in another county or already in the penitentiary, things like that. That's why the number's a little bit different. And I think when Bill and I talked the other day, or I talked with Tom Woolman the other day, and he indicated your office saw an increase in felonies about 25% this past year. Since that is our largest percentage of who stays in custody, I would just put those numbers out there for consideration of number of beds and for consideration of the surrounding communities that may want to rent space from us.
And that's what Brookings had also advised us to do, was to build for ourselves, but to make it big enough to where we could look at regional coming to us. And then they also added a kitchen and did a contract with Trinity for meal service they just opened on Monday, but then they were going to use prisoners for their kitchen help to save on that. And then it would, by the time that they put their kitchen in and brought in Trinity for their meal service, it halved, is what I'm understanding, almost made it.
Cut it by 50%.
About 50% cut from what they were catering from Hy-Vee up there.
So I guess my closing comment is it was nice to be talking to somebody about a jail that wasn't trying to sell us anything.
I'll reinforce a few points that have been brought up. First, regarding the Brookings situation, wasn't it 17 million, not 14 million? 17 million, but still considerably less than other numbers that we had tossed locally. But I want to throw,
That was the remodel.
no.
No.
And that's what I was going to say. That 17 million was the 84-bed new facility and included
Correct.
the remodel of their current jail into, I think, admin
Right,
kind of
and
stuff.
it added $3 million because they had to fight the Historical Society that they didn't want the jail to be built there. So it took them another $3 million waiting to get all of that settled. So turned out to be 17 million for their 84 beds and then their remodel, which they'll start now on their phase 2.
Right, right, which they said they hope to have done, I think, by summer. A couple other just reinforcements, comments that I want to make. These were both brought up by Betty. One is that one thing that I think that the citizens portion of the committee did really kind of say, well, we need to back up here. And that was, I feel it was a kind of a knee-jerk response to save money, to pull the sheriff's office out of the Justice Center. And I think it was, you know, just kind of a, gosh, we need to get some costs brought down. And so it was like, well, what would it cost if we kept the sheriff's office here versus out there? And I'll go on record as saying that I think it would be a huge mistake not to put the sheriff's department out in whatever the new facility is going to look like. I think that's the logical place for it to go. And then the last thing that I wanted to just mention and piggytail on what Betty said, and that is that when it was brought up about, well, why did the jail in T, why did that bond fail? And now there's two people that probably spearheaded that opposition to get it on the ballot and defeat it are sitting on this courthouse advisory committee, and we are both saying now we think that a jail is in the cards. And I just want everyone to understand and the public to understand, we were never opposed to a jail in Lincoln County. We were opposed to the way it went about and the location and the amount and the lack of transparency that was involved. That was our opposition to the T proposal. We are not anti-jail. Do you agree with me, Betty? Since it's you and I that were kind of the spearheaders.
100%.
Thank you.
And I think Larry wanted that in writing, in blood, whatever, before we ever moved forward. And we both agreed that we never said we didn't need a jail in Lincoln County, ever.
Right,
It was just the wrong location.
right.
Do we need to schedule do the members of this panel want to schedule an additional meeting here to talk about these issues? Or how do you want to proceed forward? I mean, for example, we've got to report out your thoughts to the commission. And, I mean, do you want to have further discussion about the jail? You know, what I'm hearing is you had a problem with the location, the cost, and the transparency. I concur with all of that. With regard to the cost, you know, I still don't have a good handle on what your thoughts are as to the size. I mean, I thought I heard one comment here about repurpose, and I'm not saying you said that, Larry, but I just don't understand, you know, I'm trying to get my handle on so we can report back to the commission. Are you in favor of a jail that just holds 85 people, 120 people? You know, that's what I'm trying to flush out here so that the public understands, the commission understands.
I'm going to tell you right now that I'm not smart enough to tell you what you need.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And I think some things we can look at as well, similarly sized areas from population growth, Midwestern areas, you know, what did they end up needing? Brookings has a 24 person jail now, and they've decided to increase that for 84. And I think just about everything above 30 they felt was for future growth. I don't know if we need 225. What I'd kind of like to have this committee here is some people that know something about jails come in and say, okay, here are the things you ought to look at, and here's the things you ought to make sure that you do, and here's the things that we did right, and here's the things that we did wrong. And it's very difficult to get them to answer, what did you do wrong? But Brookings told us. They said, here's the mistakes that we made, don't make these. But I think part of the process is to get our sheriff's office, or the studies that we had last time, did they or did they not have merit? Were they right or were they wrong? I'm always gonna say build big. I'm not the chairman, but go ahead.
I was trying to get Joel's attention.
Joel.
If I could have like 2 seconds, give my input.
Of course.
So, I see there's some architects on your list there. Is Steve here? I didn't see him, but this is where I get a little crossways with architects, and what Larry's talking about a little bit. You know, they come in, they'll program stuff out, and I've seen architects fall on their swords telling school districts that they need such and such a big school, even though everybody that's sitting there on the dais is like, that'll never pass. So I guess I'm gonna back into this with the jail. It seems like the one thing, and again, I'll go back because there's not a lot of jail votes, but a lot of school votes out there. The first thing that'll sink a school vote is if you don't know where the heck the school's gonna go, and if there's a conflict. Seems like here, we've figured it out. It's gonna be in Canton somewhere, right? And I'm gathering. But the one thing that I keep hearing, and I live in Sioux Falls, is folks seem to think that we're asking for too many beds. And the one thing about it, and I'll throw Dick under the bus. I've worked with Dick Strasberg. If you guys decide to hire the guy, I think he's really good. He really helped out. I worked with him at Monument out in Rapid City, up in Brookings. We did the financing there. We did the financing in Minnehaha County, and he worked there as the owner's rep. We talked about project manager, but the term really that he would play would be owner's rep. He works for you guys and has a perspective. And he really understands this concept. That's why we really hit it off, I think. And you can ask him, maybe he doesn't like me behind closed doors, but this is where we really hit it off because, you know, his thing to me is, do you want a project that has the possibility of passing, or a project that on paper meets everything that everybody wants, which when you're talking governmental entities, that number is always going to be higher than what the public's going to support. That's my 100% experience, right? So somebody's got to give and take. So if the sheriff's talking 225 and 30% of the public think that's way too big a number, I'm just saying. I'm throwing that out there, and again, that's a decision you guys have to make. It doesn't sound like again, if I was on the committee or I was living down here, it doesn't sound like that part of the project is given enough. You know, they're still sticking to their I think it was 225 when the bond vote passed or failed, and then I think it was 225 before that even. So I'm just throwing that out there. Anyway, I think that's my 2 cents worth and my experience. You know, if that number's too big in a jail and people perceive it as being too big, even though you've got all the numbers to show them all day long, it's just not gonna go. It's just not gonna go.
And Tom, I want to say that's why we are really recommending Dick Strasberg as the owner's rep to the commission.
Yeah, Dick will look at that and he'll really tell you.
And that's why we can't come up with the figure, because we know that we can leave that to him, and then he can help us through those numbers, because we don't know.
Yeah, and that's, you know, again, sometimes some people may just come up with a number. There may not be any logic behind the number, all right? But if it fits the need, again, you know, sometimes that's just the way it works. It may not have the math behind it, but it may be what the community will support. Did you have a question for me, or?
No, Bill, in answer to your question, Larry, we've spent, how many times have we had Mr. Garnos come in and do budget and do jail projections based on population, based on history? And I think we just did that a few years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
2019.
2019,
I
yeah.
also did it for Minnehaha County for the projections that they have as well. So his projection for 220 beds was that we could operate it back in 2019 for $200,000 a year. So, and the way that was is because of the federal prisoners, and then having prisoners come from outside of the county, the operating cost really is $600,000 to the county. But because of housing the other inmates, that the county would take in roughly $400,000. And so the actual operating cost out of pocket to the county was $200,000 for operating the facility.
Bill, during that process, was the public educated on what was going on in the study? Were they able to ask questions and were they able to have input?
You're asking me what other people think, and that's always a failure for me. What I can tell you is we do have a Garnos study that gives us the numbers. And I just looked in my email, and our current numbers are 74 for inmates currently. And as Chad was telling me, if you have 74 inmates, you could only have 80% capacity in a jail. Because during the week, Judge Rasmussen knows very well, if you're at 74, when you hit the weekend, you're at 105. So,
Bill, I'm going to ask you the question again, but I'm going to tell you what I've observed, and then then we'll go back to that same question.
sure.
When I got here and got on this committee, the judiciary beat into our heads the need for additional courtroom space, and they justified it, and they turned every one of us into a believer and a champion. And I wasn't here when the jail stuff went on, but I didn't see anybody beating the need for a jail into the citizens' heads, inviting them in to ask questions and explaining why we need to do this in the same fashion that we did with the courtroom. I think some of the frustration with the people up here, and I wasn't part of any of the anti-movement, is that nobody asked us what they thought, and nobody educated us about what the problem is. And so I'm sitting here, this is amazing. I mean, 2 years ago, I had these two guys, they're not gonna vote for anything, and hell no, they're your main cheerleaders. And so I'm back to the question, what did the county do to educate all the citizens about all that? And if we didn't do it, the answer is we didn't do it, or if we didn't do it well, that's a fine answer for me. If they didn't listen, that's a fine answer for me too.
So, Larry, I'm the attorney. I don't play politics. I give legal advice, and I can tell you what facts and what we have. So, critiquing the commission, who I give legal advice to, would be extremely unwise. So I am going to not answer
That's a great answer.
Larry, I'll-
No, wait a second. Then I will ask that same question to my two county commissioners. Thank you, Bill.
I'll throw Bill a lifeline and I'll give you the answer. Our commission took a very specific vote on this issue of, do we take citizen input first or do we approve the project first? And I voted and proposed that we take citizen input first. I was outvoted. And on a 3-2 vote, myself and Commissioner Gillespie said, let's take citizen input first. We were outvoted.
Since I'm the bad guy here, Larry, I will admit, you asked a lot of questions here, and I want to give you some answers. The money we spent for the Garnos one was a way in which the commission gained some insight into what we proposed and what we needed. I think I've said publicly that we've learned a lesson, or I have learned a lesson. I'll just use myself. I won't use anybody else. I've learned a lesson on this situation that we did not listen, we did not take into consideration. There were lots of other issues that affected the vote and land and so many other things. And we can go back and plow this ground all day long. But we're here tonight to say that had we done some basic things, I do think if we would have not got involved in this land situation at T, and we would have left this building, our jail in Canton, we probably would have been breaking ground right now. We wouldn't be here tonight. So if you want an apology, I don't apologize for that. I thought we were doing the best interest. We got to study based on the numbers, the size we needed. We wanted a courtroom situation. We wanted a satellite center. We had a mental health facility. We thought we had a pretty good package. And in hindsight, yeah, hindsight's always 20/20. Should we have done these things? Yes. I was one of the 3 that voted on it, and I don't know what else to tell you. I'm here tonight to say, as I've told you before, I look to my right, and Betty is a champion. And I look to my left, and Larry's a champion. And I look down, Mr. Skiles is a champion. So those are the people that I intend to support in whatever capacity I can, so we can get this job done.
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. I'll just come up here real quickly, be on the mic. I just have one real minor question. If this new facility is built, will that be called the Justice Center? And will this remain, the title of this building remain the Lincoln County Courthouse? Because you've been calling that the courthouse some, and there's been interchangeable usage of terms. So that's my only question. Can someone answer that?
This is for my own, this will be the Lincoln County Courthouse.
And then the
And it will be a
proposed,
Justice Center.
that would be called the Lincoln County Justice Center.
Correct.
That's all I need to know. Thank you.
Any other input from the members of the committee or the public for that matter?
Say, Joel, just so we can take number 3, and so we have a consensus that it's going to be, in my mind, we're going to build this thing here in our county seat. No question. So now we have a land issue that we can talk about, and if we wanted to do that tonight, because I think that Mr. Johnson, or Darcy Johnson, has probably the most desirable spot located on 18 and 111. But we haven't talked about and maybe we don't want to do, maybe we're premature here. But I have, we've looked at that spot, what we're going to cost for land, or are there other sites that are out there that the committee should be looking at besides just Darcy's spot on that corner?
Well, the reason I put this on the agenda is there were members of the committee that raised this issue. They flagged the issue of, okay, we thank you very much from one of the third-party groups for making the proposal. We got it, we'll analyze it, but you know what? There's other pieces of land around this city that may be suitable as well. And so that's what I wanted to have a discussion on.
Mr. Chairman, how much land do we need?
The number of acres that's been brought to my attention is minimum 20, most likely 30.
And the source document or the source of that information is who?
Is based upon Elevatus, and they
You
have.
guys need to use your mics.
Oh, I'm sorry. So that number has been brought to us by a number of architects, not just Elevatus, but as we were going through the process for the last 2 years of building the jail, the number consistently was minimum 20, most likely 30. I know it's a rule of thumb, it's not precise, but that number those 2 numbers have repeatedly been brought to our attention.
And the proposed campus down in Clay County for their new facility was how many acres?
I don't know.
Help me.
They're not building, I don't know what size is the jail that they're going to propose to put up, but they face an uphill struggle even with the jail. They could be potential candidates to house their prisoners as well.
So 30 minimum?
30.
And that's just what the professionals are telling us?
I just want to share this with the group. What Mr. Johnson has proposed is not a bad site, But if you've been a developer, and if the county were to acquire that land, and then it has to be annexed into the city, number one. Number two, if we are to put in all of the infrastructure of the sewer and water and do the roads, or do the road into it, we have created for Mr. Johnson the ability to to develop his entire project at the county expense. And the other thing, Larry, that I've talked to you about is the fact that we're going to have to try to upgrade the sewer capacity for the city of Canton, because at present, that would not be, we couldn't add that much facility to their existing capacity to handle the increase. So I think we got a couple of issues here. We're going to have to always be cognizant of the fact that we're going to have to do something for the city, not that there's anything wrong with that. But the other idea is, I would be interested to find out where some other sites are, because we've only just kind of always talked about that. So I think, Larry, you mentioned once up by the old fairgrounds, where we had our old 4-H grounds. But I don't know any others. I don't.
Yeah, yeah.
And while Commissioner Schmidt's looking at that, can I ask a question that I thought originally, and nobody can answer the question, but originally I thought when the Darcy Johnson group came to this committee, I thought that originally they were going to deed the land, the 30 acres, to Lincoln County. And now we're all confused, thinking that that is not going to happen.
So if it's okay, I'll give you a little bit of history on what happened. So Alan Walsh came in and approached the county, and he wanted to do something to help. And they had that property out there that they've talked about developing. So the commission went ahead and asked me to negotiate with them and see if there was something we could do. So do you remember when I came in front of the commission, I proposed 6 courtrooms, and I about got ran out of here on a rail and tarred and feathered? So what that was about is I met with Darcy Johnson. They went out and found, well, they were using the same architect, but they went ahead and vetted him. And then they were working on coming up with a size. And so what we did is we looked at all different types of things. So they talked about possibly deeding the land as part of the leasing of the courthouse to the county. They have discussed just outright selling it. Alan Walsh had said the same thing over and over again. We're trying to do something for Lincoln County. If we can help you, we will. It won't offend us if we do nothing. So he's always approached it as, we're willing to help you out and work with you. But we're also okay with the fact that if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So it was never a hard sell when I was working with him. But when we looked at the budget, and Sherry will disagree with me, but I thought that possibly between 22 and 18 million is what the county might be able to go ahead and pay out of its general fund for a facility. And so that was what we worked with the Lincoln County Development Services, was seeing if we could come up with that facility. And so in the process, then when it was clear that 8 courtrooms was what was wanted, they went back and reworked their offer. And so really, once it came down to that, it was 34 million and some change. That makes a lease coming straight out of the county's general funds. It's just not there. So when he makes his presentation and he comes in, he addresses what he was asked to do. But we didn't really go into any more negotiations or anything else, because I've been very upfront with him and telling him, here's all the options the counties could do. So he's aware of what the possibilities are. He's apparently not opposed to selling that property at this point in time, but I haven't talked to him. I don't know that anybody else has. So that's how that whole process took place, was we were just talking about leasing. So the whole bonding and everything else is a different development. So there just hasn't been any conversations with him about it. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
So at the time, when we were talking about him possibly deeding it, it'd be if he built the courthouse and leased it to us.
Can somebody help me understand what the $10,000 in soft costs is?
You mean the 10 million?
10 million, excuse me, 10 million, sorry.
Hard cost are the building, right? Actual, the hard shell of the building. And the soft cost are things like the architecture fee, attorney's fees, bond fees, things like that. And then some other, what is it, accessories?
Furnishings.
Didn't
Yeah.
the one architect say if you could pick the building up and shake it upside down, whatever fell out is the soft cost?
Well, that was used with the UJS. When you asked UJS, what do they pay for versus what the county
Oh,
pays
okay.
for? So UJS said they'll pay for everything that drops out. Now, I had a conversation with Carl about this. It's a lot more complicated than that.
Of course it is.
But to Larry's question, what are hard costs versus soft costs? Soft costs are intangible costs that we don't know the value of right now at this point.
Well, are there soft costs with the jail?
So the soft costs are the survey that has to be done for environmental needs. It's the survey for architect or for antiquities. It is the engineering fees. It's the ground survey. It is all of those services and things and studies that go into building the jail. That's not the walls and the roofs and the floor, which is the hard building. So
So on the jail building you were proposing a couple years ago, what were the soft costs on that?
well, the hard cost, I believe, was somewhere between 22 and 26 million is what they were settling out at. And then they were looking at 31 million for a total cost. So $5 to $6 million of soft costs on a $26 million project.
Betty, when we were in Brookings, did we talk about soft costs? I don't think we did. Okay, thank you.
And further to your point, Larry, there are going to be soft costs on any building. You know, that, it's just a fact. So what we've got to do, you know, we've got to figure out what those soft costs are going to be when we're throwing around these numbers to figure out how much it's going to take to finance all of these ideas. And to that end, the commission did decide today, at today's meeting, it's going to bring in Dick Strasberg from Tegra Group as a potential candidate to be a owner's representative. And he's going to be interviewed and questioned, and he'll give a public presentation on the 11th. And some of these questions that we're asking, or some of these ideas and thoughts we're having as this committee right here, we need to be humble enough to recognize we may not know the right questions to ask. You know, we don't build buildings for a living. And so, especially large institutional projects. And so we have to be willing to, humble ourselves in the sense of, we don't know these things, and we as a county may need to hire the experts to come in, and they work for us. Their loyalty of duty is, you know this as an attorney, is to us. And so they can get down to brass tacks, and they can kind of speak construction language with this Lincoln County Development Group and with the architects. And they may come in and they may say, okay, I understand you guys have this proposal from Lincoln County Development Group, but hey, I also understand there's some interest in maybe looking at outside parcels of land. Here's the questions you need to ask if that is a course of action you want to pursue.
Actually, I looked up, Larry had gotten us some of the information from Brookings County, and on that project estimate from Brookings, they have soft costs from A&E fees, civil fees, site survey permits, asbestos abatement, telephone system, all the way down. So their total soft costs were 0.44 million, not 10. Do you,
I couldn't figure out, Larry, what the heck we could get soft cost at $10 million for.
that down.
No, but isn't that what you were suggesting, is $10 million?
It
At
would,
this morning's meeting,
Yeah.
Mr. Welsh stated, I think he's the salesman for the Lincoln County Group, he stated that
did.
the soft costs are $10 million just for the courthouse as envisioned as a court, clerk of court, state's attorney, and public defender office.
but that seems so high, Joel. I mean,
That's the purpose of the
Yeah.
question.
yeah,
is
it
Yeah.
seems way out of proportion,
How do you figure
Yeah.
that out?
you know.
Yeah.
If on a $17 million project that Brookings is going to do, and they've got soft costs at $1.5 million,
Right.
you know, you could double that and say you got a $34 million project, so consequently, your soft cost could be $3 million. But that 10 million seems way out of sight. So,
When we were dealing with ARC Inc., their soft cost was almost $7 million. So that was their estimates when we went through the first time around, was they were around 7 million for soft costs.
Commissioner Aaron's, when did you say that Mr. Strasburg is coming to visit with the commission?
Tuesday, the 11th.
Thank you.
That's been confirmed, Joel.
It has been, and
has
he is
been. We're
the
gonna hire him.
first, he is the first
He's a good man.
agenda item that morning. And I don't know if he is, I think the way I understood it, he is appearing personally, and he does have to travel from
what?
Minneapolis.
He's here most of the time, though.
Oh, he's in Sioux Falls.
Yeah.
Okay, okay,
Yeah,
that makes sense. Got it.
Can I ask that question? Joel, if we hire, which I, upon the recommendation, you know, of Mr.
She said
Strasburg,
that's because of sewer and water.
where does, just so I understand this, I would look at him being the interface with the committee into working on critical issues, size, numbers, costs, and using his expertise to come to some kind of conclusion so that we would solidify that we will have X, Y, and Z. You'll have X number of beds for a jail, you'll have X amount of land, you'll have, and this will be the projected way in which they would suggest to finance this thing. So, I mean, we could, this could be done within a certain time frame of, I don't know, 30, 60, 90 days, or 100 days, or whatever.
I think it's a team approach, and
Yep.
it's gotta be holistic and global, and we'll have to implement the lessons learned if we wanna move forward down that path. Does anybody have any other, wanna have any other further discussion on locations for possible construction of a courthouse, or is it a little premature at this point?
I've identified some that I'm willing to just tell you about if you want to ask me. I don't want to broadcast them, and I don't own them, you know.
You know, if you do talk about them, their price may go up overnight.
That's why I don't want to talk about them. That's why I don't want to talk about them.
Is there any other discussion that members of the committee want to have, or members of the public that are here?
Yeah, all of us from the Citizens Committee really think this was a good idea that you put this. All of us from the Citizens Committee thought this was a great idea that you put this together. And I don't know who we say thank you to, but I think you'd still be spinning if you hadn't, so. Patting you on the back, Joel, and I'm patting you on the back, Commissioner Schmidt.
Well, thank you, Larry, appreciate it. Anybody else want to pat me on the back? No, I'm just okay, if there's no further discussion, I think here's what we'll do as a course of action from here, is we'll report back this announcement to the rest of the commission. We will have that discussion when we bring Mr. Strasburg in front of us. We can include that, I would think, as another agenda item We could just conjoin the two, basically. We can have that discussion, and we can get some guidance and direction from the commission as to how to move forward, given tonight's announcement regarding citizen support for this kind of enhanced project. So, any alibis or anybody who'd like to say anything? Oh, nope. Okay, thank you. We'll be adjourned for this evening.